And we're continuing the Sefer Mareh Yaakov. We're in the section on Noach, page 41, chapter 7, verse 22, Perek Zayin, Pasuk Kaf Beit, page 41. Kol, most, with a pazer. I don't think we've done a pazer yet. So a pazer is a major emphasis on a word, and the word is going to stand by itself. Most of the people who were involved in experimentations of phenomenon of life, trying to alter features of creation, along with their experimental animals and facilities, suffered total destruction in connection with the previous and following beginning of sentences, as indicated by the shape of the reading mark. So a pazer has a rather small base, and it leads to a spreading out. So what we see, if we get the beard out of the way, what we see is that he's talking about both the sentences before and the sentence after, where we're talking about those things that perish in the flood go up, and we see that the destruction spreads completely from there to we say again, the interpretation of kol that we're getting each time is most. This is something that begins from a small point and then goes to include the totality. Asher, that, with a tlisha ktana. Tlisha ktana is a circle with a line that looks back, always comes at the end of the word, and therefore it's going to focus you back to what happened before, because it's pointing sort of backwards. So again, we'll draw one out just to...
So what is the difference between that symbol and the other one?
So tlisha ktana
right.
Points backward. It points...
That way. Yeah, the other way. It's okay.
I'm drawing... Okay. Points backwards towards the beginning of the word, and Tlisha Gdola starts at the beginning of the word and points forward towards what's going to happen after it. So it's going to focus us backwards on what happened before.
So in functionality, what's the difference between that symbol and just it sort of looks like a comma facing backwards or forward?
So you're saying a tipcha.
Yeah.
So a merchan tipcha are simple notes that are looking forward and backwards without necessarily an emphasis on the word. Tlisha is a much more emphatic looking forward or looking backward.
Oh, okay.
Even the helpers of the activists that in any way had facilitated experimental work to enrich man's knowledge have also met the same consequences, as denoted by the shape and placement of the reading mark. So again, tlisha ktana always comes at the end of the word and focuses us back. So it's telling us that asher, those people that helped the kol, that helped the word before, even they suffered the same fate. Nishmat ruach with a kadma. So this is like a pashta, except it's going to lead into the next note. And again, emphasizes the word and looks forward. A breathing wind. A breathing wind of air was cut off by the flood, and their existence was brought to an abrupt end, as stressed by the directional shape of the reading mark. So we're going to look forward from that point, and they are no longer going to have a breath of neshama left in them. Chayim, of living. This is an azla. This is a backwards looking note that again gives emphasis and closes off the previous thought. They ignored the fact that the basis of living and activities were actually a result of a heavenly gift, which made their achievements possible, as shown by the closing shape of the directional corresponding reading mark. So again, when we have a grouping that comes together, the grouping completes itself, so the kadma and azla complete the thought. And again, one looks forward and one looks backward, and both of them are emphatic. Be'apav, by their nostrils. And he is taking a singular word and turning it into plural. So I just want you to note that be'apav is normally a singular word, in his nostrils. We've said by their nostrils, which is interesting because we're putting it in context, even though the word is to stand alone. This is a revi'i. This is a note that tells us that this word and what the idea it's going to speak of is going to be able to stand by itself. The vitality of all living things is characterized by their nostrils, where movement indicates functioning of all systems, as pointed out by the broad meaning of the reading mark. So the fact that when you breathe, you flare your nose, that is literally a sign of life. Mm-hmm. And without be'apav, without seeing any signs from the nose, from the flaring of the nostrils, then you don't have life. And this is what's the important feature, that we're saying that they were alive before and they're not alive now. This is sort of the last thing you're looking at. You're looking, are they breathing or not? So it focuses you on them being alive or them not being alive, and it stands alone. That's it. Either they're in one or in the other. There's no in between. Mikol, from most, with a tavir. Tavir is the note with the encased dot, with the dot with something sheltering around it. So we're going to see something that has some protection based on this note. From most of the pre-existing species, only those who were saved in the ark had a chance to continue their existence. The rest were lost and gone forever, as expressed by the shape of the reading mark. And again, those things that were on the ark were sheltered and were saved, and those things that were not on the ark obviously did not have any protection. Asher, that, with a mercha. So this is a forward-looking note, but doesn't completely exclude itself from the things that have come before. And compared to the kadma v'azla, it's not emphatic. It's just demonstrative. It's just telling us the text. Those who considered themselves vassals of the earth and depended on personal ingenuity that would save them were eventually faced with a catastrophic end, as seen by the reading mark. So even those people or animals who had a facility, an ability to try to modify nature, eventually did not succeed in overcoming the obstacle that the flood was. Be'harava, on the dry land, with a tipcha. So tipcha is a backwards looking note that closes off the previous thought. Together with the people, the animate species which had their permanent domicile on the dry land over the earth were reduced to nothing by one servant of God alone, as specified by the closing shape of the directional reading mark. So when we're saying by one servant of God alone, we're talking about the flood. How do we derive that they're reduced to nothing, other than in context? So Asher Becharava closes off the thought. Asher is talking about, looks slightly back to Mikol. So we have this small amount who are sheltered and saved, and we have Asher Becharava, those things that are not in the shelter of the ark and therefore don't have that protection. And that's how we derive that this is talking about their destruction. And again, it also connects to metu, the last word, had died, with a sof pasuk, and this is a stabilizing note. Beside the fact that they had died, they vanished without a trace, together with their facilities and services. So we don't expect to see any remnants of pre-flood life and pre-flood structures. And their death is stabilizing in that there is no remnant. There's nothing of them seen anymore. We have another aside, NB, Asher becharava metu, that on dry land they died. The Gemara in Zvachim says, Rav Chisda says, becharava metu, on the dry land they died, velo dagim shavim. Shabayam, sorry. On the dry land they died, but not fish of the sea. In my opinion, it relates also to all water creatures of water basins or rivers, because they too were excluded from dry land. So, specifically, the Gemara says the word shebayam, that are in the sea, but the author is saying becharava is excluding, is saying that the things on land died, and therefore all sources of water, not just salt water but fresh water, also preserved life. Which, again, is an interesting thought, because freshwater animals don't do well in salt water, and if you have the water going 15 meters above, or 15 almost above the highest of the mountains, quite obviously the salt water and the fresh water are mixing, and yet the freshwater animals are still surviving.
And saltwater animals.
And the salt, well, there's much less fresh water than salt water, so you would figure that they could tolerate a little bit of dilution, but the freshwater animal, the freshwater fish especially, would be a miraculous preservation of life against the laws of nature.
Interesting. I noticed something interesting in the pasuk. I don't see an etnachta, and usually most psukim have an etnachta. No?
So there is normally a dividing note in the middle of a sentence. So you'll have a sentence that goes until etnachta, and then you'll have the second half of the sentence that ends in sof pasuk. Very commonly we have Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, so we have a lot of sentences that are just one thought that don't have an etnachta, division in the middle. There is sometimes this poetic balance between Reisha and Seifa that we've been talking about, that the first half and the second half express the same thought in perhaps a more elevated and a more lowly way. Sometimes the thought stands alone, or the entire thought can be both the higher and the lower. So you can view it either way. Usually, the concept would be is that there's just no lower way to look at this. This is now God expressing dominance, and it was nothing. There was nothing that could stand against it. God had passed judgment, and that judgment was final, and that's why we don't have an etnachta. We only have a Reisha. We only have a higher part. We don't have a quote-unquote Seifa. But again, looking for the absence of something is an important clue as well. And we'll read the words with the notes, just so that you'll see how the first couple of words were emphatic, and Apav stands by itself, and Mikol shows shelter. So again, listen for it. Kol asher nishmat ruach chayim be'apav mikol asher becharava metu. We're continuing on page 42, Pasuk Kaf Gimel 23. Vayimach with an Azla Geresh. So this is the completion of Kadma V'Azla, but it stands alone. It's a backwards looking note, and it's emphatic. And it was erased due to the qualities and quantity of the floodwaters. Any pre-existing sign of life on the surface of the earth had disappeared. It was erased till the last trace of a previous civilization, as referred backwards by the directional shape of the reading mark. So Vayimach is going to focus us backwards on all of those things that were before. All of those things that were before were erased.
And he himself, he says, way back when he was introducing the notes, Azla Geresh, when being sovereign, acts as a high trumpet and monitors a change of routine in a dramatic fashion. So this is a complete change of routine. Wiped out.
So everything from before is no longer. Et kol hayakum, with all the establishment, with a munach. Munach separates itself out from things before and looks forward to what's going to come after. Also, the facilities with all the establishment for conducting tests and experiments were completely destroyed, as denoted by the shape of the reading mark and by the following psik. The concept of physics changing before and after the flood is something that we'll talk about later. We remember that when you have a string of munachs in a row, sometimes after the word there will be a complete pause. And maybe we're going to just pause the tape for a second. I'm going to get a chumash so I can